Tommy Lee, the cursed genius of rock and roll. He once made entire arenas tremble with his 360-degree drum solos, turning rhythm itself into a spectacle of storm and madness. But that same man, the one who made millions scream his name, has also sat in a jail cell, watching his life fall apart because of scandals, love, and his own uncontrollable rebellion. For more than 4 decades, from the wild years with Mötley Crüe to the present day, now in his 60s, Tommy Lee remains the keeper of the beat for an entire generation, one that once saw the drums as its heartbeat and chaos as its creed. He never just played with his hands, but with every wound, every mistake, every shattered piece of his life. The world saw him suspended midair in a spinning drum cage, read about him in tabloids for sex tapes, arrests, and stormy marriages. But few ever understood that behind it all, Tommy Lee was the only one in Mötley Crüe who never pretended. He lived brutally honest, loved recklessly to the point of self-destruction, and always returned to the stage as if he'd never fallen. When he said, "I don't play drums with my hands. I play with everything that's ever hurt me," it wasn't artistic metaphor. It was truth, a truth that built a legend and demanded a price. So why, after all the chaos, prison, and loss, is Tommy Lee still called the last man keeping the rhythm of rebellion alive? Let's begin where the first beat was struck, in a small room in Athens, where a Greek boy once tapped out rhythms to escape the loneliness of belonging to 2 worlds. Tommy Lee was born on October 3, 1962, in Athens, Greece, under the full name Thomas Lee Bass. Few could have imagined that the man who would later become rock's ultimate symbol of rebellion was once a child caught between 2 opposite worlds. His mother, Vasiliki Vula Papadimitriou, was a former Miss Greece, elegant, proud, and raised within the confines of propriety. His father, David Lee Thomas Bass, was an American soldier serving with NATO, strict, disciplined, and reserved. The family moved to California when Tommy was just a few years old. His early life was free from war or poverty, but not from distance. His father was often away due to military duties, while his mother, though loving, remained absorbed in a world of old photographs and fading glamour. The house was so quiet that the only sound that made young Tommy feel alive was the rhythm of his own hands tapping on the furniture. At 4 years old, he received his first gift, a toy drum set. No one realized that what seemed like a simple diversion would end up shaping his destiny. Tommy didn't just play the drums, he lived with them. Those first beats were far from perfect, but they pulsed with raw instinct and energy no one around him could explain. When the family finally settled in Covina, a suburb of Los Angeles, Tommy began teaching himself music. He became fascinated by drummers like John Bonham, Led Zeppelin, Peter Criss, Kiss, and Alex Van Halen, musicians who were as much icons as instrumentalists. The lanky teenager spent endless hours in his family's old garage, drumming until his hands blistered to the point where neighbors would complain about the noise every night. At school, Tommy wasn't a good student. He had no career plans, no dream of college. He was introverted, withdrawn, but the moment he picked up the sticks, he transformed, fierce, liberated, and confident. For him, the drums weren't just an instrument. They were the only way to escape the loneliness of a childhood spent in silence. By 16, Tommy was already playing with local high school bands, performing at bars and community events. He didn't earn any money, but for the first time he felt seen. On stage, the drums didn't just make sound. They filled the empty spaces within him. When his father left the military, the Lee family finally settled into stability in the U.S. But Tommy didn't. He told his mother he wouldn't go to college. Instead, he would pursue music. She didn't stop him. Perhaps she understood that her son could only truly be happy living in the middle of the noise. At 18, Tommy Lee began playing professionally with a local Los Angeles glam rock band called Sweet 19, a young, promising group trying to make their name on the Sunset Strip. They performed in gritty clubs where cigarette smoke, cheap booze, and distorted guitar riffs blended into the only language the city's lost youth seemed to understand. On those small, flashing stages filled with chaos, Tommy always stood out, not just for his long hair and tall, lean frame, but for the way he played the drums as if he were fighting himself. It was during one of those nights that Nicky Six, a rebellious and eccentric bassist looking for someone to join his new project, noticed Tommy. Years later, Six recalled, "He played like the world was ending. I knew I had to have him in my band." That meeting was fate. The two instantly connected through a raw energy, a shared belief that music wasn't something you just listened to, but something you lived, something that broke every boundary. They began searching for the missing pieces. Mick Mars, a quiet but fiery guitarist, joined first. Then came Vince Neil, a high school friend of Tommy's, whose voice carried both wild instinct and swagger. By 1981, the four of them, so different yet perfectly aligned, became one entity, Mötley Crüe. The name was strange, even hard to pronounce but unforgettable, and it would soon become the banner for an entire generation. Their debut album, Too Fast for Love, 1981, was recorded on a shoestring budget but hit the rock scene like a punch to the face. Tommy's drumming was fierce and precise enough to shake the studio walls. The guitars screamed, the vocals roared. It all came together as a declaration of youth. We don't need anyone's permission. It wasn't just their sound that shocked people. It was their image. Heavy makeup, tight leather pants, platform boots, towering hair, a look both masculine and outrageous, sparked what would later become the glam metal revolution. While other bands tried hard to look cool, Mötley Crüe simply were cool, arrogant, electric, born to burn every stage they touched. At the heart of that chaos stood Tommy Lee. He didn't just keep time, he embodied the band's pulse. With no formal training and no ability to read sheet music, Tommy played by instinct, with blood, sweat, and the loneliness that had followed him since childhood. He created rhythms that were paradoxical, chaotic yet ordered, raw yet emotional. And when fame finally exploded across America, Tommy did something no one had ever imagined before. He invented the 360-day rotating drum set, turning himself into the center of the stage. While guitarists and vocalists usually claimed the spotlight, Tommy pulled all eyes toward the drums, suspending himself upside down, spinning midair, drumming as if defying gravity itself. From that moment on, Tommy Lee was no longer just the drummer of Mötley Crüe. He became the first true showman drummer in rock history, transforming drumming into a cinematic performance where technique, instinct, and madness fused as one. And with every beat that thundered through the crowd, he proved one simple, unshakable truth. I don't need to read music. I just need to feel it. And when I feel it, the whole world hears it. After Too Fast for Love opened the door and proved that a band born out of Los Angeles club scene could still become a phenomenon, Mötley Crüe returned in 1983 with Shout at the Devil, an explosive album that defined the glam metal movement and turned them into cultural icons of the decade. From the cover alone, Crüe caused a stir. The pentagram symbol, black leather pants, towering hair, heavy eyeliner, and songs like Looks That Kill, Too Young to Fall in Love, and Shout at the Devil were charged with dark energy, provocation, and rebellion. Conservative American media were outraged. Religious groups condemned them as devil worshippers, and MTV initially banned their videos for promoting violence. But for Mötley Crüe, that was their first real victory. They didn't need to be loved. They just needed to be heard. And at the center of that storm, Tommy Lee was the heartbeat of hell itself. His drumming thundered like a storm, relentless, ferocious, yet controlled, channeling an energy audiences had never seen before. He wasn't just keeping time, he was driving the band past the line that separated rock from legend. The success of Shout at the Devil paved the way for a golden era that lasted throughout the 1980s, a run rarely seen in American music history. Theater of Pain, 1985, though panned by critics, sold over 4 million copies and pushed the glam image to its peak: lipstick, leather, glitter, and unrestrained decadence. Girls, 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 1987, turned Mötley Crüe into the living manifesto of Reagan-era youth, people who worked by day and dreamed of chaos by night. Then came Dr. Feelgood, 1989, their first album after a stint in rehab, a true musical pinnacle, razor-sharp sound, tight rhythms, flawless production. It became Crüe's first record to hit #1 on the Billboard 200, proving they weren't just a scandalous band, but an empire of their time. Among them, Tommy Lee was the ultimate performer. He didn't just sit behind the drums, he turned the stage into his own sky, where he would rise with his 360-degree spinning drum kit hanging upside down and playing midair while tens of thousands screamed. That image, a man suspended in the air, sweat flying as he hit every beat with precision, became one of MTV's most iconic visuals. The press called him the craziest drummer in the world, while fans affectionately called him Mad Tommy, the madman they adored. At the height of fame, during a backstage interview on the 1988 tour, when asked about his secret for keeping such energy, Tommy simply smiled and said, "I don't play drums with my hands, I play with everything that's ever hurt me." That line became legendary, printed on magazines, t-shirts, and quoted endlessly in interviews. It wasn't just a philosophy of drumming, it was Tommy Lee's truest self-portrait. A man who turned pain into power, loneliness into explosion, and suffering into rhythm. Every strike of his sticks was a confession, chaotic, instinctive, powerful, yet deeply emotional. His technique wasn't taught, it was felt. By the late 80s, Mötley Crüe were no longer just a band. They were a cultural phenomenon, the living embodiment of sex, drugs, and rock and roll in the Reagan era. They dominated the media. MTV played their videos almost every hour. Magazines like Rolling Stone, Hit Parader, and Circus put them on their covers. They partied with Ozzy Osbourne, destroyed hotel rooms, and somehow remained standing at the top of fame. And at the core of it all, Tommy Lee was the soul and the fire of Mötley Crüe. He was the one who made the crowd look up, who ignited the band, and who burned himself out in the process. Because no one can fly forever in the fire without getting burned. And behind the blinding lights of fame, the first cracks began to show. Between success and self-destruction, between the roar of thousands and the silence when the curtain fell. Tommy didn't yet realize that when the lights went out, the darkness of his life was only beginning. After the massive success of Dr. Feelgood, it seemed that Mötley Crüe would continue to reign over the rock world. But as the 1990s began, everything changed. The rise of grunge and alternative rock from Seattle, led by bands like Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and Alice in Chains, brought a raw, dark, and defiant sound that rejected everything glam metal stood for. To a younger audience, Mötley Crüe, with their teased hair, leather pants, and over-the-top attitude, suddenly looked like relics of a bygone era. From sold-out arenas, they now faced empty seats and declining record sales. In 1994, the band released their self-titled album, Mötley Crüe, their first without Vince Neil, who had left after internal conflicts. Though heavier, darker, and more industrial in tone, the album was panned by critics and largely ignored by longtime fans. The promotional tour was a commercial disaster, and relationships within the band deteriorated from brotherhood to silent warfare. Tommy Lee, still commanding the stage, could feel that the soul of Mötley Crüe was no longer burning. It was fading in the smoke of its own former glory. By 1997, the band decided to reunite with Vince Neil for Generation Swine, hoping to reclaim their past brilliance. But instead of harmony, the project revealed deeper fractures. Nikki Sixx wanted to reinvent their sound, Mick Mars was struggling with illness and depression, and Tommy was drowning in a chaotic personal life, where the spotlight was no longer from the stage, but from flashing paparazzi cameras. During this time, Tommy Lee became the center of a global scandal with Pamela Anderson. Their fiery relationship, whirlwind marriage, and the infamous leaked sex tape spread worldwide, turning him from a rock genius into a tabloid fixation, a symbol of Hollywood excess and decay. The public spectacle crushed Mötley Crüe's reputation. Record labels hesitated, the media turned hostile, and tours were canceled en masse. By 1999, after a decade of living through music, violence, and endless intoxication, Tommy Lee officially left Mötley Crüe. The decision didn't come from a grand announcement or a heated argument. It happened one morning when he stood silently before his drum kit, then simply walked away. Legal troubles, a jail sentence for assaulting Pamela, and mounting exhaustion convinced him that the journey with Crüe was over. He left the band he helped create, carrying with him both the glory and the scars. From those ashes, Tommy Lee began a new chapter, his solo career. Gone were the blinding lights of stadium tours and the roar of tens of thousands. But for the first time, he was free to create purely for himself, not to shake the world, but to rediscover who he was. After leaving Mötley Crüe, Tommy didn't retreat into silence as many expected. Instead, he immediately launched a mission to redefine himself. In 1999, he founded Methods of Mayhem, a project that fused rock, rap, and electronic music, genres that were still unconventional for mainstream audiences at the time. Featuring collaborations with hip-hop artists like Kid Rock, Lil Kim, and Snoop Dogg, the debut album of the same name drew attention for its raw, chaotic energy, much like Tommy himself. While it wasn't a massive commercial hit, the project proved he wasn't trapped in the mold of a glam metal drummer. He still dared to experiment, to burn, and to fail if he had to. 3 years later, in 2002, Tommy released his first solo album, Never a Dull Moment, a mix of funk, alternative rock, and electronic influences, where he not only played drums but also sang and produced. Though it didn't top the charts, critics praised it as a creative turning point, the first time listeners could hear not just his rage, but also his reflection. By 2005, he released Tommyland, the ride alongside his autobiography. Tommyland, a raw and unfiltered look into his life, love, mistakes, and longing for freedom. For the first time, the public saw Tommy not just as a rebel or scandal magnet, but as a multifaceted artist capable of expressing his truth through art rather than chaos. That same year, he ventured into television with NBC's Tommy Lee Goes to College, a reality series documenting his attempt to live like a normal student at the University of Nebraska. Though comedic in tone, it revealed a humorous, sincere, and sometimes awkward side of Tommy, far removed from his wild rock star persona. A year later, he joined Rockstar Supernova, 2006, as a judge and musician alongside Jason Newsted, Metallica, and Gilby Clarke, Guns N' Roses. And in 2008, he teamed up with rapper Ludacris for Battleground Earth, a reality show focused on environmental awareness, showing yet another side of him, someone who cared about the world beyond himself. Though he no longer dominated the charts like in Crüe's glory days, Tommy Lee proved he could evolve and create without relying on nostalgia. He kept experimenting, kept pushing boundaries, and kept the artistic fire within him alive, in a way few expected. A rebel who had learned to grow up, yet never stopped making the world turn its head to listen. In 2004, after years of going his own way, Tommy Lee unexpectedly reunited with Mötley Crüe for the Red, White, and Crüe tour. The name itself felt like a declaration. They were still America's wild sons, carrying the madness, arrogance, and immortal spirit of rock and roll. The tour became a global phenomenon, sold out in every city, with fans overflowing from stadiums just to see the four names that had once defined an entire generation: Vince Neil, Nikki Sixx, Mick Mars, and Tommy Lee. It wasn't just a reunion, it was a ritual of nostalgia, a moment when the past blazed once more, even though everyone knew that fire had nearly gone out before. 4 years later, in 2008, they released Saints of Los Angeles, the final studio album with the classic lineup. Though it didn't have the explosive power of Dr. Feelgood, it was seen as a love letter from those same reckless boys to the city that had made them. The title track, driven by Tommy's pounding drums, sounded like a roar from the past. Still defiant, still fierce, still alive. But deep down, everyone knew that time had started taking its toll on Mötley Crüe. By 2015, the band announced their farewell tour, promoted as Mötley Crüe's final show ever. On stage in Los Angeles, Tommy said, "If this is the last time, then let's make it count." Hundreds of thousands cried, millions watched from screens around the world. But true to their nature, Crüe never really did anything final. Just a few years later, they returned once again, signed new performance contracts, and proved to the world that, as always, they're not done yet. Back on stage, Tommy Lee watched his bandmates struggle. Mick Mars was fighting a debilitating spinal disease, every step a battle against pain. Vince Neil had lost much of his voice, weighed down by exhaustion after decades on the road. Only Tommy, at an age when most would have retired, still kept the beat alive, still thundered with the same fire as before. Every strike of his drumsticks was more than music. It was defiance against time itself. The image of Tommy Lee spinning upside down in midair became an immortal symbol of rock performance, a visual legacy no one has ever replicated. No matter how much technology or music evolves, no one forgets that moment. A man hanging in the air, still drumming, heart beating in rhythm, while the crowd erupts below. It wasn't just a performance. It was Tommy Lee's declaration of life. You can fall, you can lose everything, but you keep the beat until the very last second. Never content to stand still, Tommy proved he would never fade into the background. While many of his peers retired or lived in nostalgia, he stepped boldly into a completely different world: electronic music. Under the moniker Electro Mayhem, Tommy appeared at festivals and clubs across North America, no longer behind the drum kit, but behind the DJ booth, electrifying crowds with high-energy remixes. To him, the pulse of drums and the pulse of bass were one and the same, both ways of making the human body move to a primal rhythm. In 2020, at 58, Tommy shocked the rock world by releasing Andro, a wildly experimental project drenched in hip-hop and electronic sounds, featuring collaborations with a roster of young rappers and artists. Many called it a cultural shock, unable to believe that Mötley Crüe's drummer would release an album filled with trap beats and synths. But to Tommy, it was a natural evolution. If you don't break your own boundaries, you're slowly dying. Andro wasn't made to please old fans. It was a message to the younger generation. Rock isn't dead. It just changes its form. Through daring collaborations with artists like Post Malone, Rob Zombie, and the Smashing Pumpkins, Tommy Lee continued expanding his influence beyond the world of metal. He didn't cling to the title of legend. Instead, he chose to speak to a new generation, passing down the same fearless, unbreakable spirit of someone who refuses to stop. More than 4 decades after he first picked up a pair of drumsticks, Tommy Lee remains a pioneer, blending genres, redefining performance, and defying expectations. From glam metal to alternative, funk, hip-hop, and EDM, he has never stopped proving one truth: that both music and life only truly exist when you dare to go beyond every boundary. In the history of Mötley Crüe, if Tommy Lee was the heartbeat, then Mick Mars, born Robert Allen Deal, was the soul of their sound. the man who turned cold riffs into the screams of a rebellious generation. Mick had once been an unknown guitarist, drifting through dozens of small California bands before deciding to be reborn at the age of 30. He changed his name, dyed his hair black, adopted the appearance of a creature emerging from the shadows, and posted a small ad that read, "Loud, rude, and aggressive guitarist looking for a band." That ad led him to Tommy and Nikki Sixx, and marked the beginning of a revolution called Mötley Crüe. Tommy once said in an interview, "Mick is the soul of Crüe's sound." Among four men consumed by alcohol, drugs, and lust, Mick was the quiet one, almost detached. Yet whenever he touched his guitar, the air itself seemed to shift. In The Dirt, 2001, Tommy wrote, "I've seen Mick pale as a ghost, then walk out on stage and play like nothing was wrong. It wasn't just an anecdote. It was pure reverence for the eldest member of the band, who had been battling ankylosing spondylitis since he was 17, a disease that slowly fuses the spine, turning every movement into agony. For decades, Mick forced himself to endure unbearable pain just to stand and perform, sometimes needing to be helped backstage after shows. In 2015, when Mötley Crüe announced their farewell tour, the real reason wasn't that they were tired of each other. It was because Mick's body could no longer handle another tour. Tommy was seen in tears watching him tremble on stage, yet still play the entire set list like a warrior refusing to fall. But after everything they had survived together, the rock world was shaken again in 2023 when Mick Mars filed a lawsuit against Mötley Crüe. He accused the band of cutting him out of profits after he stopped touring due to his illness, and of using backing tracks, pre-recorded parts, during live shows. The rock community was stunned. A band once seen as a brotherhood was now torn apart by money and betrayal. Amid the chaos, Tommy Lee's response was unexpectedly measured. He told Billboard, "Mick has every right to be angry and he deserves respect." A short statement, but enough to show he chose to stand in the middle, neither defending nor attacking, only acknowledging the truth that Mick was the one man in the band who had never faked his music. In contrast, Nikki Sixx lashed out on social media, claiming Mick was no longer capable of performing, shattering whatever unity remained in public view. As the lawsuit unfolded, fans realized that Mötley Crüe hadn't been destroyed by time, but by division. Yet, no matter how deep the rift, Tommy Lee's respect for his old bandmate never faded. In a 2024 interview, he said, "Without Mick, Crüe are just a bunch of soulless maniacs." To Tommy, Mick wasn't just a guitarist. He was proof of the quiet strength that had once kept Crüe alive. One man silent, the other explosive. They couldn't have been more different, yet they were bound by a thread only music could forge. And even if they no longer speak, even if they now walk separate paths, whenever Mick's guitar echoes somewhere, the rhythm in Tommy's heart still answers instinctively, as if they were both standing together once again under the blinding stage lights before a roaring crowd, in a time that will never return. Before his name became synonymous with some of the most sensational romances in Hollywood, Tommy Lee had a very different kind of first love, quieter, but the beginning of a lifelong pattern of emotional chaos. Her name was Elaine Starchuk, a Canadian model and dancer, and she was the first woman to make the young rocker from Los Angeles believe that he could be both wild and genuinely in love. They met in the early 1980s, when Mötley Crüe was just starting to crawl out of the Sunset strip club scene. Elaine was a magazine model who often appeared in music videos and backstage events. She was beautiful, seductive, and drawn to the uncontrollable energy of Tommy. Tall, skinny, with bright eyes and a laugh that could fill the room. Tommy, meanwhile, was instantly mesmerized. At a small party after one of the band's shows, he approached her, asked her out to hear live music, and within weeks they were inseparable. Two young souls finding refuge in each other amid the chaos of Los Angeles nights. Friends later recalled that this was the only time Tommy truly loved. He bought her flowers, left handwritten notes, and even promised not to party while Elaine was away performing in Las Vegas. They soon moved in together, and by 1984, they were married in a small, quiet ceremony. No media, no publicity. At the time, Tommy was entering the peak of his fame with Crüe, while Elaine was beginning to step away from show business to focus on their home. To those around them, they were the embodiment of passionate youth, a love like a summer fire, bright, brief, and impossible to contain. But only a few months into the marriage, reality began to set in. Tommy was still Tommy, a rising rock star surrounded by alcohol, drugs, and temptation. Elaine tried to hold on, tried to build stability in a life constantly on the road, but the harder she tried, the more she was consumed by the whirlwind of fame. She later admitted in an interview, "I loved him, but he loved the stage more. That's where he lived. With me, he only rested." With no children and no time together, the young marriage began to crumble. Tommy was gone for months at a time, while Elaine had to endure seeing his photos splashed across magazines, sometimes alongside other women. Arguments became routine, and after just 1 year, they divorced quietly. Tommy rarely spoke about that first marriage. In one brief interview, he simply said, "I was too young. I didn't know how to love without hurting someone." Elaine, years later, spoke of him calmly. She said she had no regrets, calling it a small chapter in the life of a man who was always larger than limits. For Tommy Lee, Elaine Starchuk was a first love filled with mistakes, but also the only one marked by innocence. Years later, after a trail of turbulent affairs, he admitted, "It's strange. My calmest love was my first one, back when I hadn't yet learned how to destroy everything I loved." And perhaps, amid all the drums, lights, and scandals, Elaine remains the rare memory of a Tommy Lee who once knew what peace felt like, before fame, lust, and rebellion turned him into both a legend and a man destined for loneliness. After that brief marriage ended, Tommy seemed ready to return to the reckless lifestyle of a rock star until he met Heather Locklear. It was 1985. Mötley Crüe was at the height of its fame, and Heather was America's TV princess, the star of hit shows like Dynasty and T.J. Hooker. They came from two opposite worlds. She was elegant, polished, the epitome of 1980s American beauty. He was wild, tattooed, impulsive, and incapable of restraint. But it was exactly that contrast that pulled them together like two poles of an electric storm. Tommy first saw Heather at a backstage party after a concert in Los Angeles. He later said that when she walked into the room, all the noise stopped. To him, she looked like an angel in a world of smoke and thunder. He approached her first, and although Heather had little interest in the rock scene, she was struck by Tommy's almost childlike innocence. He wasn't trying to impress her with fame or swagger. He was genuine, awkward, even sweet. Within weeks, they started dating. All of Hollywood thought it would be a fleeting infatuation, but the opposite happened. Tommy fell for Heather so deeply that he wanted to become a normal man. He tried to stay away from drugs, picked her up from sets, and even attended award shows, something he had once mocked. To Heather, Tommy was a burst of chaos and charm, the man who made everything feel alive. They went public, and a year later, on May 10, 1986, they married in a lavish ceremony in Santa Barbara. White gown, tuxedo, and a crowd of photographers. For the first few years, they were genuinely happy. Amid the scandals of Hollywood, Heather and Tommy became a power couple, the TV beauty and the wild rock drummer. They were often seen hand in hand, and Heather affectionately called him "my sweet disaster." She said, "He makes me laugh every day, and that's what I need more than anything." For Tommy, Heather was his anchor, the one person who brought peace to his stormy world. But soon, their two worlds began to drift apart. Tommy was pulled back into the relentless rhythm of touring, a world of parties, alcohol, and temptation. Heather, used to the steady schedule of film sets, felt increasingly alienated by that chaos. She tried to understand, tried to wait, but the distance grew with every flight. Tommy once said, "I loved her, but I belonged to the stage. She belonged to the camera." They had no children, an unspoken void that quietly eroded their bond. Heather wanted to be a mother. Tommy wasn't ready. She began to doubt. He began to run. The more they loved, the more they hurt each other. As Crüe continued touring the world, rumors of infidelity and wild behavior filled the tabloids. Heather remained silent, no jealousy, no confrontation, just quiet exhaustion. By 1993, after 7 years of marriage, they divorced amicably, at least on paper. No lawsuits, no battles over assets, just two people finally realizing that love, no matter how beautiful, couldn't bridge two incompatible worlds. When asked about Heather, Tommy said, "She was the best woman I ever lost." And Heather, years later, smiled softly and said, "He has a heart of gold. He just never learned how to keep it whole." The love between Tommy Lee and Heather Locklear didn't end in scandal or rage, but in quiet sadness, like the last beat of a drum in a song too beautiful to continue. And from that silence, Tommy began to spiral deeper into a life of chaos, the path that would soon lead him to the woman who turned his love story into a full-blown storm, Pamela Anderson. If his relationship with Heather Locklear was a beautiful, melancholic ballad, then Pamela Anderson was the most chaotic chapter of Tommy Lee's life, a storm whose echoes still linger today. They met in early 1995 at a party at the Sanctuary Club in Los Angeles. At the time, Pamela was the brightest star in entertainment, the global sex symbol following her meteoric success on Baywatch. Tommy, the infamous drummer of Mötley Crüe, had already seen fame, scandal, and 2 failed marriages. But when their eyes met across the crowd, everything seemed to shift into a different orbit. He later wrote in his memoir, "She walked in, and I knew my life would never be peaceful again." Tommy pursued Pamela in a way only he could, impulsive, wild, and instinctive. When she flew to Mexico for a photo shoot and didn't return his calls, he boarded a plane straight to Cancun without warning. What began as a reckless gesture ended in one of Hollywood's most notorious decisions. They married after just 4 days of knowing each other, on a beach, with Pamela wearing nothing but a white bikini. No rings, no wedding gown, just 2 people laughing uncontrollably under the sun and surf. "I'd never been that happy," Pamela later said. In the beginning, they lived like 2 dreamers lost in their own world. Pamela called Tommy the man who made me believe in crazy love, while he said, "She's an angel with burned wings." They filmed home videos, traveled constantly, and loved each other with such intensity that the line between passion and destruction vanished. Their Malibu beach house became a symbol of love at its most beautiful and its most dangerous. Then, in 1996, everything collapsed overnight, when their private tape was stolen and spread across the world. From a power couple, they became victims of one of the biggest scandals of the 1990s. It wasn't just the invasion of their privacy, it was a public humiliation, a wound to both pride and identity. Pamela spiraled into emotional collapse, while Tommy, infamous for his temper, responded with anger and violence. Police were called to their home multiple times for domestic disputes. Yet even in that chaos, love persisted. In 1996, they welcomed their first son, Brandon Thomas Lee, and a year later, their second, Dylan Jagger Lee. Tommy adored being a father. He once said, "The first time I held Brandon, every drum in the world went silent." Pamela hoped that their children would heal them, but the cracks between fame, pressure, and volatility were already too deep. The breaking point came in 1998, when Tommy was arrested after a domestic altercation. The court sentenced him to 6 months in jail for assault, the final straw that led Pamela to file for divorce. Leaving the courthouse, she said quietly, "I don't hate him. I just can't live in fear anymore." After the divorce, Tommy's life entered what he later called his self-destructive years. He had lost the woman he loved most, carried the stigma of domestic violence, and lived under relentless media scrutiny. Everywhere he went, bars, stages, even his own home, paparazzi followed. Inside, all that remained was the echo of what once was: his wife, his children, the scandal, and a hollow silence that fame could never fill. Then, in 2001, as Tommy was trying to rebuild some normalcy, tragedy struck again. During a birthday party for his son Brandon at their Malibu home, a 4-year-old boy, the child of family friends, drowned in the pool. The incident shocked the public. The boy's parents sued Tommy for $10 million, accusing him of negligence. Although the case was later settled out of court, the guilt consumed him. In a rare interview, Tommy said, "I couldn't sleep for months. I just wanted to disappear." From then on, he spiraled deeper into alcohol, drugs, and fleeting relationships. He dated models, actresses, DJs, but none could pull him out of his loneliness. His career stalled, and the image of the legendary drummer was replaced by that of a fallen idol. The media painted him as a symbol of the 1980s rock generation, men who refused to grow up, who refused peace, and were now being devoured by their own past. Pamela stayed in touch occasionally as they co-parented their sons, but their relationship remained tense, full of affection, anger, and resignation. Even after Tommy's release from jail, they reunited several times, tried to rebuild, then fell apart again. They raised their boys together and sometimes appeared side by side as if nothing had ever happened. In a later interview, Pamela confessed, "Tommy was the greatest love of my life, but that kind of love was too intense to survive." Then in 2018, tragedy struck again, this time within his own family. On Father's Day, an argument between Tommy and his eldest son, Brandon, turned violent. Brandon punched his father, knocking him to the floor, and Tommy himself posted photos of his bruised face online, igniting a media firestorm. Pamela publicly responded, calling Tommy a narcissist, the worst kind, because he doesn't see who he's hurting. Her words were like the final cut, severing the last fragile thread between them. Tommy later admitted his faults, but also stopped defending himself. "I've destroyed too much because of my anger and pride," he said in a 2019 podcast. "I just hope my kids understand that I tried to be the best father I could, even if I wasn't good at it." And even though he dated others afterward, Tommy still spoke about Pamela with a certain look in his eyes. In 2020, he wrote on Instagram, "I did a lot of wrong things to her, but if I could go back, I'd still marry her, still live it all over again. Because without Pam, I'd never have known what it means to love someone to the point of destruction." That is the darkest truth behind this glam metal legend. A drummer who once made the world shake, yet couldn't keep his own family from falling apart. The drums that defined his life still echo, fierce, passionate, and at times, like a cry for help lost in the crowd. Today, both have long left their youth behind. Pamela lives quietly in Canada, while Tommy still performs. They are no longer a couple, but whenever one name is mentioned, the other inevitably follows. Like two notes of fate, forever bound in the most turbulent love song rock and roll ever wrote. When it seemed that everything had passed, when the name Tommy Lee had become little more than a relic of the past, fate led him to Brittany Ferlin, a woman more than 20 years younger than him, and the embodiment of an entirely different world: social media. They met in 2017 through Instagram. Brittany was one of America's most popular Vine stars and influencers, funny, witty, full of life. Tommy, in his 50s, was still a rock legend, but weary of the spotlight and the chaos of his past. It seemed unbelievable, but Brittany, born long after Mötley Crüe's glory days, was the one who brought peace to a man who had lived his entire life in disorder. He messaged her first, and soon they were talking for hours every day, as if they'd known each other forever. Tommy said, "I thought no one could ever put up with me again, until Brittany came along. She makes me want to be a good man." Brittany told People, "I knew his past, but I wasn't scared. I saw a lonely man who just wanted to be loved for real." They began dating publicly, often sharing funny, playful moments online, a side of Tommy the world had never seen. Their relationship, for many, symbolized a bridge between two generations, a rock icon who ruled the 1980s and an internet star of the 21st century. Despite the age gap and gossip, they appeared genuinely happy. Brittany often joined him on tour, while he called her the antidote to my past. On Valentine's Day 2019, they married in a private ceremony at their home in California, surrounded by a few close friends. Tommy posted a simple caption online: "I finally found someone who makes me want to stay home." After years of chaos, he said it was the first time in his life that everything felt light. In the early years, their marriage was truly happy. Brittany tried to distance Tommy from the old scandals, helping him focus on his music and health. They had no children together but shared their home in Calabasas with several pets. Tommy rebuilt his recording studio there while Brittany tended the garden. She often joked, "He used to play drums for millions. Now he wakes me up every morning making coffee." Yet peace, for someone like Tommy Lee, is always fragile. The shadows of the past never vanish completely. In 2018, when the Pam and Tommy miniseries, which would eventually air in 2022, was announced, his tumultuous love story with Pamela Anderson resurfaced across the media. Social networks were flooded with photos, clips, and comparisons between Brittany and Pamela. Brittany became a target of online attacks, accused of never measuring up to Pam. Tommy defended her as best he could, but the constant noise still wounded her deeply. She later admitted on the podcast Between Good and Evil, "It's hard to love someone everyone has an opinion about. I know he doesn't love Pam anymore, but I have to live with her shadow every day." Tommy, equally hurt, said, "I don't want anyone else to suffer because of mistakes I made 30 years ago." Cracks began to appear quietly. Brittany started feeling abandoned as Tommy spent more time touring and reuniting with Mötley Crüe. He, long accustomed to independence, found it difficult to adjust to a marriage that demanded patience and communication. Rumors of arguments and distance began spreading in 2024. In early 2025, when wildfires ravaged California, Tommy once again showed the same blunt humanity he always had. He criticized fellow artists for being indifferent to disaster, writing on Instagram, "It's insane to see people promoting their albums while thousands are losing their homes." Though his words irritated some peers, fans saw in him the very thing they'd loved for 40 years: raw honesty, unfiltered and real. At 62, Tommy Lee no longer needs fame or noise. All he needs is rhythm, in his music, his life, and his soul. After all the chaos, loss, and rebirth, what remains is not the legend but the man himself, fragile, wild, and finally at peace. Tommy Lee's legacy isn't measured in awards or technical accolades. It lives in the way he turned the drummer into the heartbeat and spectacle of rock itself. Before him, the drummer was the one who kept time. After him, he became the one who led the storm. His airborne drum kits and the infamous drum roller coaster performances set a new standard for showmanship, a blueprint that generations of artists would later follow. In the rock world, Tommy Lee's name became synonymous with fearlessness and limitless creativity. He brought glamour, speed, and raw insanity into percussion, making audiences feel music with their entire bodies, not just their ears. In doing so, he redefined the entire spirit of 1980s performance, the stage as a battlefield, every beat a declaration of life. By early summer 2024, he posted a photo online, his hands wrapped in bandages, gripping drumsticks, with the caption, "Got my hands back, got my life back." And a few months later, he returned to the stage for Mötley Crüe's Atlantic City tour. Audiences saw a different man, still fierce, still precise, but no longer manic. Critics called it Tommy Lee 2.0, no longer playing from raw instinct, but from awareness and intention. Every beat was no longer an explosion, it was a declaration. "I'm still here." The band went on to announce a 2025 Las Vegas residency, marking over 4 decades since Mötley Crüe's birth. And Tommy, knowing his body would never be the same, still kept the rhythm. Not for fame, but because it was the only thing he had ever done with complete honesty. Away from the stage, he lived quietly in Calabasas, California, in a $6 million mansion with Britney. After years of chasing lights and chaos, his life had slowed into something almost ordinary. No parties, no hard liquor, no crowds. He spent time fixing his studio, tending the garden, and learning to go to bed early like a normal person. Britney once joked on a podcast, "He only showers once a week, but I love him for who he is." The line made headlines, but beneath the humor lay a rare truth. Tommy Lee had finally learned how to live gently. By early 2025, the media reported that Tommy Lee and Britney Furlan had separated after allegations surfaced of her infidelity, something Britney neither confirmed nor denied. Though he didn't publicly attack her, Tommy quietly deleted many photos of them together from social media. A close source revealed, "Tommy was more sad than angry. He just said, 'Maybe I wasn't born to keep anyone by my side for long.'" Britney eventually moved out of their Calabasas home, while Tommy resumed touring with Mötley Crüe, as if returning to where he'd started, surrounded by lights, drums, and solitude. In 2024, after years of relentless performing, Tommy finally faced the toll his body demanded. His hands, the very tools that had taken him from a garage to the world's biggest stages, began to fail. Doctors diagnosed him with carpal tunnel syndrome and Dupuytren's contracture, conditions that caused his fingers to stiffen and seize, making it painful to even hold drumsticks. For a drummer, it was a devastating sentence. But Tommy, who had already survived prison, scandals, and himself, refused to surrender. He underwent surgery and endured months of physical therapy. His influence went far beyond metal. Musicians like Joey Jordison and Travis Barker have openly credited Tommy for inspiring their "play like it's your last night" ethos. And despite the chaos, scandals, and storms, Tommy never lost sight of his core truth: play real, live real, and never apologize for who you are. For over 40 years, he's left behind more than legendary records. He's left behind a way of living, daring to try, daring to fail, and daring to rise again. At 62, Tommy Lee doesn't need to be worshipped as a legend. It's enough that somewhere out there, someone still feels their heart beating in rhythm with his drums. Tommy Lee's life was never a calm melody. It's a chain of restless beats driven by chaos, passion, and the relentless will to live authentically. At an age when most choose silence, he's still walking onto the stage, still keeping time for his own life, because for him, that's the only thing that keeps the heart alive. And what about you? Would you dare to live as wildly, just once, to feel truly alive? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe, where every legend isn't just remembered, but seen for who they truly are.